friends, and welcome. Midlife crisis, also known as MLC, is often dismissed as a cliche, but the reality is far more serious. During this period, individuals experience a profound psychological and emotional upheaval, leading to impulsive and self-destructive decisions that they later regret. Despite the clear signs of instability, MLCers are currently allowed to file for divorce and make irreversible financial and legal choices, often to the devastation of their long-term spouses and families. Thank you for joining us today, because now you are going to hear people from around the world as they tell their story in their own words about their bomb drops and beyond. The stories and events discussed in this podcast are based on our guest experiences and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. They should not be considered legal, medical, or professional advice. Any names, locations, or identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Any similarities to actual persons, living or dead, or real events are purely coincidental. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the host or the podcast creators. Listeners should consult with a qualified professional regarding their own circumstances. Hi, listeners. Today I have the queen of MLC. This is KENDA-RUTH STUMPF. She's gone through midlife crisis with her husband, Chuck. She was inspired to start a Facebook group, which is now, I believe, to be the largest Facebook group for midlife crisis, left behind spouses, forward moving spouses, MLCers. It is phenomenal. She offers one-on-one coaching. She offers Thrive membership group. She has quizzes on one of her pages of where you can take the quiz for free and see if possibly your spouse is in midlife crisis. She has the most resources I have seen anywhere. So I am so excited today to introduce you guys to Kenda. So hi, Kenda. Welcome.
Hello, Tina.
So tell me so many years ago, your husband, how did Chuck's crisis start?
So I was never sure of what the trigger really was, but the crisis was in 2005. So we are going way back. In fact, bomb drop was 1 year ago and 4 days. 20 years ago and 4 days.
I was going to say, wait, what?
Wow. So 20 years and 4 days. I just realized that.
Wow.
Yeah. So his crisis
did
started.
You see it coming? Or was
No,
it?
I didn't see it coming at all. And maybe I should have. We were never the perfect couple. And we hadn't been together. We weren't one of those long-term couples. I was young.
Mhm.
I was 32 and a half. He was 39 and a half. And we'd been married. I think we were married almost 7 years at that point. Versus the average age of length of marriages, I think I'd have to look at the statistics, maybe about 17. The average age of bomb drop is 46 to 47 for both men and women about.
Mhm.
And so he was right at that 39 and a half, approaching 40, which is common, but still below the average. And me being not even 33 yet, I was very young in the group.
Mhm.
So I was just a baby. We had people in the group that could have been my parents. So we weren't long-term married. We didn't have kids yet, all of that. And I had struggled with employment because I was in the biotech industry, which can be volatile.
Mhm.
So we'd already had ups and downs going on. But we had a bomb drop, and we'd been discussing having kids, and that we were going to wait until I had been at a job for a period of time, because we wanted, and that was my goal as well. We wanted to be stable, and I didn't want to start work and then just get pregnant. I didn't think that was fair to a job.
Mhm.
And suddenly he said, "No, I don't want kids anymore." And for some reason, must have been intuition. I just knew that meant something more than it usually did. And a few days later, I was discussing this with his brother's wife, my sister-in-law, while he was telling his parents that everything was over. Yeah. And then when I came home, he told me that. And my sister went home to her husband, and that's what he told her. And she says, "Well, that's not what we talked about." And I'm at home falling on the floor.
Wow.
That was how my memory of that was. So within I that week I went to the library and just checked out everything about infertility and 35 or pregnancy and having children after 35 because somehow I just knew something was real.
Hmm.
That was my
So
focus at that
so
point.
you that's a little different. So it's not
Yeah.
like you went to the library looking for about divorce or midlife crisis, or
Mhm.
you were researching fertility.
Yeah, I wanted to know. I knew that my marriage was in a crisis, but it wasn't a midlife crisis thing yet. This
Mhm,
is within the first 24, 48 hours. So it was, I know something's big, and I know that we are no longer going to be trying to have a baby within a next year.
mhm,
And I am almost 33, and I know that they've said infertility hits 35.
mhm,
And you already know, and for those who don't, I was probably already infertile. So probably a coincidence, but we now have 5 adopted children.
mhm,
So I didn't know that at the time, but turns out, yeah, that was gonna be a reality for my life. So I didn't find much. Within 2 weeks, I had found a divorce. I kinda crossed over to and was also picking up marriage books and that sort of thing, and I found divorce busting. Chuck had probably said something about, "Oh, maybe it's just a midlife crisis," but I
Chuck
can't
said
believe.
that?
Yep. Yeah,
He's
and
like the only husband I've ever heard of that says
well, I've seen
voluntarily
that.
said it.
I think it was a throwaway comment,
Mhm,
and I've seen that said by some,
mhm,
but they're just trying to give you something to latch onto, but it's not, they don't mean it,
mhm,
even if it's real. And
uh-huh.
sometimes they might mean it, but they don't know that it's a subconscious comment.
So
Freudian
when
slip.
he said that, what did you think?
I latched onto it enough that when I saw it in the book,
Uh-huh,
and what I did is I was flipping what I would do with books typically is I flip through the chapters and
right,
see I just look
looking
at
for what
what.
applies.
Yeah, and I saw a chapter on midlife crisis and divorce busting, and I flipped straight to it and read that one. And I saw what I had been experiencing for the last, I was probably 2 weeks in, maybe 3. And so not very long in, but I saw what I'd been experiencing just in those few weeks.
Mhm,
I was like, "Oh my god, just right now, this is it." And so then I just pivoted completely to midlife crisis.
mhm,
And I saw that there was a
mhm,
website and forum for divorce busting. And I went there, and she had several different groups in the forum, and I joined the midlife crisis group, and that was it for me. I was in that group for years, for
mhm.
3 or 4 years. About
Yeah, 'cause this was back in 2005.
This was in 2005, so I probably joined the divorce busting group April 2005.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that was where I got started, and then I also had joined Jim Conway's group, and Jim Conway is the author of Men in Midlife Crisis,
Mhm,
which back then we considered, many everywhere considered the Bible of midlife crisis. Jim Conway was a minister, and so it was a very religious text, but it was one of the only main texts out there as well. So he had a group, and it was a religious group as well, but they met live. And back then, we didn't meet face to face, it was a chat, so we had to learn to do the chat, and it was a moderated chat. So a few times, I think it was twice a week, Jim was in the group,
mhm.
and other times he had a leader that would open the group and would moderate for him. But it was really great when Jim was in there because Jim would be there to answer our questions.
Wow. Okay.
That was
How
very
how were
helpful.
you guys doing these in-person chat? Was it like a Zoom kinda thing? Was it video?
So there was no video, it was just text. So it was just, think about how you chat on Facebook,
Uh-huh.
I think, probably. It was probably
Oh, it
similar
was
to
through a
that,
forum kinda thing that he had set up.
but
Okay.
he had a room. So it was
Uh-huh.
just set up and you typed and it was back
Yeah,
and forth, but because it was live
yeah.
like
Oh,
that.
great.
And he had an assistant there because so there were many questions that everybody asked. So he had some, I don't want to call them canned answers, but you asked this question, and so he had some answers that were always the same, and so he'd paste them in, which was really helpful
Mhm,
because what that meant is I saved a lot of those, and I can say, "Here's what Jim Conway says about this,"
mhm,
and he's consistent on it then,
mhm.
and about certain things. And I had those saved, so I know what Jim's ideas about these things are, and that was really helpful. And Jim was very nice, very helpful. I liked him better than his moderators. because he's the minister, but his moderators were a lot more fundamental on the standing than he himself was. He
Let me
kind of
ask you,
came them in.
did Jim Conway personally have a midlife crisis?
Yes, he did, and that's how he wrote the book. I think many of us would call what he had more transition, but
Mhm,
that might not be fair. Also, I don't wanna minimize his experience, but he
mhm,
never left home, and he didn't have an affair.
mhm,
But Jim Conway did have an extremely traumatic childhood, and he would be an example of somebody who then overcame so much from what he had was raised in to kind of cross over the tracks to a different world.
mhm,
He was he earned his PhD, so probably the first in his family to go to college, and then graduate school, and then PhD, and he was the leader of probably what we would call a megachurch today, very large church, and he said his interest back then had always been actually working with youth, but with his midlife crisis, he started to write about midlife crisis. He would be what we would probably call a low energy wallower. He never left. His wife also wrote several midlife crisis books. So I think they were doing that together. Sally
yeah, yeah,
wrote some. And so I had both of their books, and they were very helpful. But it was really helpful to talk to Jim personally.
mhm,
What I found was the most helpful, more so than just talking to him. But Sally was the one who had some of the terms, such as I have the terms about contact types,
mhm.
and I call them clinging boomerang, which is really a boomerang with a certain subset of it. But I have a boomerang
So
with
wait, are you the creator of these terms?
so I created these terms, boomerang, clinging boomerang being a type, but boomerang, vanisher, off and on, and vanisher. So those off and on, vanisher being a distant contact. Sally described them as drop in, droplet, and dropouts. So drop in would be where a boomerang would go.
Mhm,
Droplet would be off and on. So that was like, well, droplet? It didn't have a good definition
mhm,
from the name. And drop out. So I thought I need definitions that seem more clear.
mhm,
And that is the same with Jim's stages. When Jim took his stages, he looked at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief and dying, and he applied those to midlife crisis. He used the same terms with the exception of bargaining, which he called replay. And that is absolutely a good one. Replay is a great name for that. Then he added one, which was at the end. We have acceptance right before that. He added withdrawal. And I one time asked him, what is this withdrawal and why? And I don't remember getting a very clear answer on that. I don't buy into that as another stage that should be in there. It's confusing. First thing, there's withdrawal all the time. Are we withdrawing from the alienator? What are we withdrawing from? And so I think telling people that there's this withdrawal is going to confuse them because they're looking for withdrawal and they're seeing different kinds of withdrawal. And so they see, oh, it's listed as a stage. My person is in the stage right before acceptance. They're almost out. And that's not how it
right,
is.
right.
And then I also took some of those stages and I found the names that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and therefore Jim used. It's not that they're not accurate, but I don't think they're good names for the stages because they're names that are can be applied outside of the stages, such as anger or especially depression. Stage 4
Mhm,
is called depression in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and then Jim Conway. And midlife crisis is depression, all of it.
mhm,
Whether it is hidden, masked, overt, or covert depression, or overt, which is what we would consider what we think of when we see depression. So the depression stage is usually when you see them start to go into what we think of as depression. But some MLCers, a low energy wallower, may appear that way the whole time. So I split the replay bargaining stage into types, not stages. And I call that stage liminality.
mhm,
And I split it into two types, a replayer type. And the replay stands for do over. Jim Conway said this is when they want to do everything over. And they go to about age 17, but they may go to younger ages as well. And I'm trying to do over my life. So those ones are high energy. And then there's those who seem to be standard depression and they're lower energy. Even if they're seething with anger, but they kind of are low energy. And those ones are not, they don't always stay at home, but they're more likely than a high energy to stay at home or stay at home for a longer period of time before moving out.
Uh-huh.
They are also, everybody is more likely than not to have an affair, but the higher energy do have higher rates of affairs, physical,
Uh-huh.
especially. You're going to have
Can
a higher rate.
somebody be low energy wallower for like 2 or 3 years, sort of covertly depressed, and then maybe hit limerence and become a high energy replayer? Is that what you called it?
You probably could, but usually what you'll see is you'll see them be one type.
Uh-huh.
Other than that, in the beginning, you will see the low energy wallowers want to be high energy. They try to be because the high energy is where it's fun. I
Uh-huh.
call the high energy replayers, they're the bachelor party ones. They are the frat boys or girls.
Uh-huh.
And that is the fun lifestyle. That is, you're trying to avoid the low energy, the depression. And you're still depressed, but you're avoiding what we see as depression, the melancholy.
Uh-huh.
And so who doesn't want to go out there and have fun?
Uh-huh.
That's the high energy affair. That's the addictions that you see out there, the high party lifestyle. And so a low energy person will try that and they fail at it. Maybe it's just that they're not good at it. Maybe addictions don't do it for them. Maybe they're not really into drinking. It just doesn't take for them. Maybe they didn't find an affair partner that worked.
Uh-huh.
Maybe they just got rejected. And they just didn't find the right person. Maybe they just weren't lucky at it. But oftentimes it is part of their temperament that they were always going to be a low energy wallower. And so you might see them try that for several weeks, even a few months, but they will fall back into their low energy pattern and stick more toward that. They may even leave and come home and just wallow at home if they don't fall into their own apartment
Uh-huh.
and low energy. And that low energy could just be seething angrily, but it's low and they may maintain that. Now, limerence can bring somebody into a higher energy. Yes, it doesn't mean that it will, but limerence can also mimic replay or limerence. So limerence, somebody who isn't really in a midlife crisis could seem to be in a midlife crisis with limerence, or that somebody who is close to it, you could be tipped into a midlife crisis
Huh.
for there. If you'd have to have the other pieces ready in a
Uh-huh.
perfect storm, but that can do it. So maybe what if you were going to have a midlife crisis at 46, but all the right pieces in a limerence came along at 41, that could do it.
Yeah.
But you have to have the right background at that as well.
In your situation, your husband left, came back, left, came back several times.
8.
8.
So there were 8 times, but I don't want people to get scared about that. I was very picky about counting each little time.
Uh-huh.
So there were some big and there were some little ones where he tested. And I counted each one of those as a tick of yes, came back. And I did that for a few reasons. Number one, I want people to understand the crazy. I want to be authentic with that.
Uh-huh.
I want you to see what it really was. So there was a time where he came home, and I am pretty sure he came home with the absolute purpose of testing. So
You mean
that
like
he was home.
overchecking?
I don't even know. No, I don't think it would be anchor checking because that's checking on, hey, where are you? How
Uh-huh.
are you doing?
What was the testing?
Um, the testing to see how much he could get away with before he.
Oh, oh,
He could
okay.
have even done it in testing rather than checking.
Right, right.
So, in other words, he didn't really have any true. He wasn't really trying to come home
Uh-huh.
on that time, and I don't know that for sure. I didn't ever ask him, but he came home, and that weekend, right after that, so he probably came home on a Monday. I don't know if it was Friday or Monday, but the weekend right after that, we went to a regular vacation spot. We went to Leavenworth. We stayed in a motel there for the weekend, and it was awful. On the way there, while we're driving, he got out to get gas, and he was either calling or texting her. I can't remember what I did with that one. Was that when I got out of the car, or was that another time? I sometimes get each incident mixed up.
Mhm.
But he was basically through this weekend, poking at me to see how far he could take it.
Oh.
And so on this occasion, I told him, "You need to leave when we get home." And there are 2 occasions where I say I kicked him out. I have had to revise that to say 2 because in the past I said there's 1 occasion where I kicked him out. But really, this is the second one. This is actually the first one that happened. Because this time said, "You need to leave when you get home." The second one is several years later in the future where I actually packed his bags, greeted him at the door. And so it was more obvious of a kicking out. But this one, I had him do it. "When we get home, you need to leave."
Mm-hmm.
And he did. So I didn't need to do a push. I didn't need to get his bags. From my memory of this, he did it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of his purpose. He was trying to drive me to do it. And there were other times when he was already living at home where he would try to get me there,
Mm-hmm.
but it was clear he was ramping up to leave again. And the whole point was that he needed to make the decision. But on this particular weekend, he had just gotten home. And since the whole reason was to see what he could get away with, I wasn't going to let him get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
On those other times, I discovered he was about a 3-monther. After about 3 months, he either wanted to come home or he would go try and leave. And that could have been the energy dynamics with her or just his own, but probably between the 2 of them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he would come home, and then after about 3 months, it might be a little less than 3 months, you'd start to feel it maybe. The energy would ramp up more and more and more, and he would start taunting. And you could tell she was really trying to get him to leave. So I'm sure his taunting was probably based on her emotional blackmail of him. And my job at that point was to get him to make his own decisions and to be detached and to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
And if he didn't ever leave, if he were to stay and stay and stay and stay, then things would have been different. If he were to stay and say, insist on staying, and, well, I can just do whatever I want, then that would change the dynamics. But he would try to hide things, and yes, I know what he was doing.
What?
And if I found things, so I found paperwork for her daughter, who had been in drug rehab and some different incidents in jail, or she was a stripper at a local strip club. And so one day he left her court paperwork on the table, that sort of, so it was very obvious. And one day he left his phone open. It was not open to anything, not a big deal, but I think there was one kind of innocuous message, but I think she was on it, or her daughter was on it. So he was just leaving tiny clues around. Hey, what's this? What's this? But those are just in the last week or 2 before he was going to leave anyway.
Huh.
And so it was, am I going to do the dirty work or are you? And at that point, I made a choice that because he was doing it to get me to do the dirty work, I was leaving it for him. Now, if he hadn't been doing it for that reason, there are some MLCers out there who are just like, yeah, I can do whatever I want. I'm not leaving. They aren't doing it for you to do the dirty work. That's different. But he was very adamant about it. It was like, I want you to make the decision for me.
Huh.
Or I want one of you to make the decision for me. And I said, well, I think we've both made that. I think we both have. You need to be a man and make your own choices. And it's a really hard thing to do when you're trying to figure out what you should do yourself and then help others what they should do, because it's not always the same. It's not even the same in your own situation 6 months in the future.
Right.
Where, there might be a 6 months in the future where he is trying to say, I can do whatever I want and I'm not leaving. And I will say, okay, then you are out. And I will. And so it's not always a do as I say, not as I do situation, but I have had to struggle with that myself, is when I'm helping other people, am I doing what I'm advising? And I know then that I have to look at each situation. And I'm sure there are many times in my own situation where I wasn't doing the best thing, that if I'd been advising myself, I wasn't following the advice. It's hard to do that for yourself.
Uh-huh.
It really is. And so I messed up a whole bunch, just as we all are going to mess up. And in midlife crisis, especially with a clinging boomerang, you can mess up, and it's kind of like a trampoline. You just bounce through it. And what a clinging boomerang is your MLCer needs reassurance from you. They are very attached to you, and they don't really want out of the relationship. They may want to poke at you, but they don't want to lose you.
Mhm.
And they want reassurance that you are going to be there. And you have to be careful with that, because how much codependence is that? And if you are not a strong person, if you are a codependent person, I am very concerned about somebody who is codependent and standing, because they need to get independent,
Mhm.
learn independence and then interdependence.
Mhm.
Independence first, interdependence later. Because codependence and standing is not a good combination, because that would be a recipe for a later continuing codependence and abuse. And so you need to be able to set boundaries, be strong, know who you are in yourself. And then you can choose that standing and go forward with it from there. And what I told him, a few things were, and I had to get to this place when he got reassured, he wanted me to believe in him. And once he knew that I was standing, it took a few years, and that I was not going to give up on him, and that I was not going to file for divorce. And he did file, and that was done quickly. He unfiled with my agreement. We signed that away. That was out of the picture. No more lawyers involved within the first few months. I said, as long as you're, and this is near the end, as long as you're being an inappropriate spouse, we will not have a relationship. You cannot, we're going to go no contact. And that was my strong no contact. And that was when he was not, it wasn't quite when he was not living at home. It was his warning, or what I told him, this is what is going to happen when you leave again.
Mhm.
And it was not an if. We both knew, because you can tell where the trend lines are going, or the writing on the wall,
Mhm.
that he was going to leave again. The alienator was ramping up her energy to get him out, and he was doing it. And you could see it from him that he wants to leave and he doesn't want to leave, and he wants to and he doesn't want to. And so I just told him, okay, well, when that happens, as long as you're being an inappropriate spouse, and I don't know if I actually used that term
Mhm.
with him, but it's the easiest clinical generic term I can say for globally. But as long as she is in your life, and that means everybody that has been an influence for pulling you away, that is not a friend of the marriage. And that meant her family, even though her family themselves weren't inappropriate. But any people who had instigated the affair, anyone like that, as long as those people are in your life, you are not allowed to have me in your life. And I told him, that does not mean that I will divorce you, but that does mean what one of the counselors we had spoken with the year before that had said is, yeah, that does mean emotional divorce. There is
Mhm.
an emotional divorce that means people can live without the paper that says you're divorced legally
Mhm.
for years. There have been people that are split up, they even have other partners for 30
Yeah.
years.
Just like emotional affair,
Yep,
emotional divorce.
yep.
Um,
And I said,
and
so I'll
Kendra,
be a part of your life. Yeah.
so the bomb drop was April 2005. Do you recall what year this was?
So March 20th, 2005 was the bomb drop.
Mhm.
So this was 2008 in the summer
Wow.
when I gave that hard boundary. So
3
mm,
years later.
yes,
Mhm.
it took me a long time to get to that hard boundary of absolute reassurance. I think it was around the spring when he came up with what I realized was your height of cake eating. The
Mhm.
height of cake eating is when he said, "Well, you know what? I know you're gonna be there because I can just co," and I don't know which order it was. "I can leave you in the morning, and then at night I'll change my mind and leave her." Or it
Mhm.
was her in the morning and me. But because he knew I was never going to leave and never going to divorce him. And that's when I realized, okay, well, that's when he could come home if he were to do that and say, "I don't have to leave." So that's when I knew I have to do that hard boundary. And it takes me a while to figure out how to apply it, what words to use. And he's home. So it's the next time when you leave. And so as he was preparing to leave, and by preparing, I don't mean he's out there packing his bags, but as you can feel it's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And during this time, were you still doing the Jim Conway stuff or any other?
So I hadn't been on Jim Conway's site quite as much. I might occasionally drop in.
Mhm.
Um, so I'd been there through that time. I'd been there through 2007, and he was home for an entire year. the entire year of 2007, he was home. And at that point, and during that time, I knew that this did not mean midlife crisis over. This did not mean reconciliation.
Mm,
I just knew I had an MLC who was now at home and
mhm.
had taken his affair underground. So 2008 came along is when I don't want to say ramped back up, but what eventually happened, and I know we're kind of going back and forth in this timeline. What happened was his mom, she had heart problems, and the alienator was a certified nursing assistant, and she'd originally worked at a retirement home with him and gotten fired very quickly. And now she'd gotten a job at the hospital, and turns out she worked on the same wing or ward as the cardiac ward where his mom was now a patient. And that meant that he went to see his mom and he was now able to tell me, hey, I saw today. Whereas he'd taken his affair underground, so he's hiding that. But if you see your mom, you're allowed. I'm not going to say you can't go see your mom. That would be so wrong of me. And so he has a reason to publicly tell me he has seen the alienator. And this is
Mm,
January 2008.
mhm.
And so from that point on, her energy ramps up. And by point on, it's only like 2 or 3 weeks. It was the end of first week of February, was it? Something like that, unless it was the first week of March. I'd have to look at my notes. Um, I watched him leave one day for work and he pulled out a cell phone. He was not allowed to have a cell phone anymore. That was the agreement when he came home. He came home in January of 2007. The agreement was as soon as your cell phone plan was up, no more cell phone. You are to get rid of it completely. We tried switching phones, switching numbers, none of that. Nope. No cell phone at all. And his phone plan was up in April. So we agreed to wait that long because he wasn't gonna budge on that piece. But so April of 2007, his phone plan was up, so he had no phone from then. Well, it turns out gave him a phone. And so he hid it for that from April or May of 2007 until now, January, February of 2008. So I saw him get in his car where he had always hidden his phone in his bag, pick it up. And so I knew immediately what's going on if he has a phone, because there's only one reason for him to have a phone.
Right.
So don't do this. It took me a few minutes. So I wasn't right behind him tailgating him, but I got in the car and followed him to work, where I really wanted to confront him loudly, and I just said, I know you have a phone, and I hounded him at work before he started until he caved. No. And after that, I knew what I had told him before. And that what I said was, if you're with her again, you're not allowed to live at home. You'll have to leave. And you have to leave immediately. So, but I was still scared. This is a Saturday. I got an appointment with one of my mentors, and I think wasn't able to see her until Sunday. That was the emergency appointment. And I was like, "Yeah, I gotta talk to you. I gotta talk to you." And so Sunday I talked to her and she's like, yeah, you know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to kick him out. I'm like, okay, darn. So on Sunday, he had me bring him a battery for his motorcycle or something to Costco. He thought everything was fine. I had his bags packed. And when he got home, he came in our back door through a back alley and I escorted him. Literally, I had the bags in his or whatever car, and I escorted him through the house, through one door and out the next. It feels horrible and you feel bad, and at the same time, you feel very empowered.
Mhm,
You feel both,
mhm.
in and out. And with you're being inappropriate and you know the rules. Here, and you do that knowing. I did that knowing exactly where he was going to be. Yes, it is her house. It's almost always her house. Years later, and perhaps only a few years ago, he did tell me that he spent one night during one of these times, I don't know when, at his friend Scott's house. So tell me where we were, though.
Um,
Well, and it was an absolute requirement that he leave.
mhm.
We'd agreed on this a year before. He was home for a year and 3 weeks about. And this was one of the rules upon that supposed to, again, unless you just into her, like seeing her because you're at
Yeah,
the cardiac ward.
yeah.
No, absolutely not. You have to leave.
Mhm.
My mentor even said, you should have his bed sitting by the front door as a reminder. And I said, I'm not going to go that far because you don't want that hanging over your head for your rest of your relationship.
Yeah.
So I did that. But I had his bags packed and he walked out. And like I said, you do that knowing that he's gonna go straight to her house, unless that was the time he spent one night at Scott's. But if he spent one night there, the next night he was at her house.
Mhm.
You just have to have the confidence or assurance that if you are standing and that's what you want at that point, this is a clinging boomerang. He's going to be there. That relationship with her was toxic. She was most likely a borderline personality with several of the things she had done through and to us and to herself through this.
And Ken, did he realize that she was toxic? And did Chuck realize going through a midlife crisis? And
Yeah,
so he did.
I
It's
think so. Yeah,
wrecking.
I think he realized these things because of who I was.
Mhm,
So in the beginning, we did the midlife crisis. He said that thing. I got the books and he saw them.
mhm,
And I said, hey, if you want to read them, they're here. But I didn't push that. But I knew about them. They weren't a secret. I don't like people going and talking to their spouses about it, especially if they haven't said anything to you.
mhm.
They will then say, oh, you know what? I just said that to get, because I thought that would get you, off my back. Or, you know what? I changed my mind. It's not really that. Or one of the common ones, I can see how you think that. People want to bring the evidence. Look at, all of these things you're doing. I can see how you would think that, but it looks like it, but it's not really that.
Mhm.
So do not bring the evidence, especially if they didn't bring it to you first. But even if they did, if they bring it to you later on and say, hey, can you tell me about this? And they seem authentic, it's not a manipulative ploy to trick you.
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead. But even then, scary. And
Tread carefully because it could
yeah,
be a push if you start.
exactly. And tread carefully because maybe it's fine in the beginning, but where does it turn? Where does that conversation go?
Mhm,
So he knew all the time. He knew about divorce spouse. People don't know about my forum that the spouse doesn't know. They don't know about my Facebook page, which is good. It's meant to be private.
sure.
And I
And
don't
then
want them
did
hearing it.
did he see the toxicity in his little pea?
Oh, absolutely. He saw the toxicity on her. And some of it doesn't matter if you were in limerence for someone. So
Yeah, they
one
just
of the very first things a couple of the very first things that happened before I knew about it, she had a diamond ring from, I believe, her grandmother. And he took her, and I think it's not that he took her, but I think she made sure to come along to something at his parents' house immediately, like maybe a week after we moved out of our house. She was wearing this ring, and she told them that she was engaged to him. And now Chuck's
in front of
family,
him?
yeah,
Wait,
his
and he's
family,
married to you?
exactly. Yeah,
How did that go over?
well, first thing, remember that he'd already announced to them several weeks before this
Oh, that's
that
right,
he was
yeah.
divorcing, so they knew that. Now they know that he's already leaving me. He has an apartment now, left, so he's moved out, so this is after bomb drop. There were about 6 weeks before he got into his apartment, which was a sublease from a friend, which is why it took that long. Now he's out of the apartment. This is sometime summer or just maybe it's a little before that. But actually, I think this is right after the affair became physical.
Mhm,
So it had been an emotional affair, but I say that there are emotional affairs where the people really think they're just friends and they don't realize, and then there are emotional affairs where they're waiting
mhm,
and they know it's more than they're limerent, they're planning. This was one of those. They were planning it to be physical,
mhm,
but they're just wait time, and that was one of those. So it's almost not fair to call it the other kind of emotional affair.
mhm. Yeah.
So I think this was after it had become physical, and she has now to him, she sees him, and she goes into the parents' house, and they're not always the greatest people, but they're polite. And so, I think it's more, what are we gonna do? What do you do? And so you're just like, polite. You put on one of those
Congratulations.
like, yeah, hello. And she announced to them, I guess, from what I've been told, she was engaged to him.
Mhm,
And he told me, I asked him, how do these things make you feel when you have these two women? And he said, well, first thing, it makes you feel really good because you've got two people who want you. And you're torn because you also have this control person here. And it's you don't know how because it's mixed messages within yourself.
mhm.
S
In their brain,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. You've already got the midlife crisis other stuff.
Mhm.
So she had just before he moved, she'd been fired from their job. So they'd worked. And now one of the other things that happened was he's now had a bad happened around the weekend that they might have gone physical back before that. But now he's out of work and he's having problems with his work and labor and industries. And so she has called work, which is her former employer, and threatened to sick her lawyer on them. To Chuck is a serious breach of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he's kind of embarrassed about that. She is writing him letters every time he is able to go into work. And he does go into work. And these letters and buying him cards. And Chuck hates it. He complains about the cost of birthday cards and now I have to buy them. But she's writing him these long letters and cards. Now, this is a woman who is 7 years older than I am, and he is. She has webs of the cards, and she circles these areas and writes tears and points an arrow to the tears. And he has just left for work. You just left for work a few minutes ago, and I'm missing you so much. I can't wait to give you a baby. These are letters like this, yes. And they're just filled letters about how I miss you terribly. I mean, it's like somebody written by a 17-year-old.
Right.
Because you can have healthy 17-year-olds. They are crazy. And there were stacks of these. And
Wow.
the stacks of these this was from this time until, so June, July, and August of just those 3 months were these letters and cards. So a lot for a person to take.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, wow, look at how important and wonderful I am that somebody loves me this much. That the dynamic, it's kind of a love bombing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, is this
You're
person?
right. It is a type of love bombing.
It is. It's a complete love bombing because it's been crazy or, wow, she really loves me. It's both.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And when you are in that weekend and you don't feel confident,
Yeah.
that's a real ego boost.
Totally.
Even scary. So you get both of those things going on for you.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it like a dopamine rush or something like that?
Oh, yeah. I would think so. It is a rush of everything. And that you've got limerence already going in on it. So it's just helping that limerence. So he has had all of those things going on that are making it seem, it might not even feel toxic so much as it feels scary in the like, is she a stalker or does she really love me? He doesn't, I don't think he would use the word toxic at this point. Yeah, that's just not.
Stalkers do love their victims sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. A weird kind of love, but
Right.
absolutely. Yeah. And then when he decides home, it was my birthday and he talks to me, I want to come home. And okay, we work this out that he has to go to a neighbor's, who is our friend's house to stay. And he moves out of her house when she's at work. And then I made him go break up with her in person. I said, this is the only time I did that. But I said, you need to be respectful. And people may not understand that. But you can disrespect one woman, you disrespect. And yeah, she might have been disrespecting my marriage and me, but I don't want to be that person.
Right.
And I think for the time she knew that it was me that had him do that. But from then on, when he broke up with her, I wasn't able to do that because I had to let him do it. It would be enabling.
Yep.
But the first time I did that, and I'm still glad I did it that. So he went that night and broke up with her at her work. And apparently that night at 1 a.m. afterwards went and took a pregnancy test. She is a month shy for 41. She says she took a pregnancy test and it was positive. So here's the of evidence of toxicity.
Mm-hmm.
A few days later, she calls him, or he calls her to check on. Hey, how you doing? I feel so bad. One of those. And she tells him, I have this pregnancy test. You should come and see it. Come over here. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't go there. I'm trying to get him to not do it. No, you have to let me go. I have to. And I really want a baby too. And what if all that stuff? Because remember how we started with, we don't want children anymore?
That's right.
That was just a ploy. And I knew that. I knew that the whole time because we both wanted kids. And in that last year, he'd been a big driving force on it. I wasn't holding back, but he was the one who had lists of names and was bringing them up and things. So, and then he was taunting me that summer about who he was going to have a baby with instead. Yeah. So here he is.
Kenny, you really have a lot of patience. And,
Yeah, yeah,
I
you
mean,
see?
you must have a really strong belief system because, this is a really tough for you to go back and forth, and it's like
It
a
was
roller coaster,
and
you know?
this is only the first few months. This
Mhm,
is March, and now this is August 24th when we moved out on her when he moved out from her.
mhm,
So, this is probably August, though, when she's a little bit. So, we're not very far in. This is 5 months into a midlife crisis, so you're still in MLC land, forward moving south, I'm still a baby
mhm. Oh, totally. Yeah, 5
trying to
months.
figure that out. Yeah, and so it is crazy, and I will tell you, strength at home, but I completely failing and falling apart at work,
Mm,
completely. I mean, it was awful, and that's kinda how it works for me, when it comes to compartmentalization, is I do okay in one and the other place I don't do. But so he went while he's driving to go to see her for this, and so she can show him me stick, I'm looking up how do you fake a pregnancy? Because 'Cause I'm like, I know there's a way to do it. I just
mhm,
know, but I didn't have time to do that while he's there with me,
mhm,
and I looked up that some of those and this was 20 years ago, they could be different now, but you have that window, maybe it's 20, whatever, if you wait after you pee on the stick, and then after that, you're not supposed to look at them after this window either. There's a period of time, if you let it go too long, then it changes from negative to positive. And so if you just hold on to that stick eventually, it'll start to say positive.
mhm,
And it depended on the brand, so I didn't know what brand, but I said, but there's a good likelihood that stick, which was negative, would now appear to be positive. And she could just show that to him.
mhm,
And so he had to get home and I had to tell him that, but he wanted the baby so desperately he wasn't going to believe me. He wasn't saying I was lying. He just explained, I have to believe that true. And I understood that. I mean, he wasn't saying anyone was lying. He wasn't doing an MLC monster on me.
mhm,
His friend Scott, we were all telling her, you know, we understand yeah, there could always be the possibility of this, that she's being truthful. Does turn out that a few months after that, she had a full-on hysterectomy. Somebody who had a full-on hysterectomy only a few months later is probably not fertile
mhm,
at 41. So, take that right there. But she then had a doctor's appointment, she said. And I'm just like, no, she doesn't really have a doctor's appointment. And no, we're not going to enable this charade she's got. So,
mhm,
no, you're not doctor's appointment her. So then when I said she could go to it, okay, whatever, you cannot tell me not to go to the doctor's appointment. It's like, I roll and okay, whatever. So that one got conveniently canceled. Oh, really? I'm shocked. And then just faded away and I never heard about it again. I don't ever remember her hearing about some sort of a miscarriage. Even he, I don't remember. Maybe he heard that both of us never, and he will, even to this day, he might still say, well, I don't know for sure.
huh,
And not that he doesn't know for sure. And he says, yeah, I agree with you that it probably wasn't. Even I would say probably,
mhm,
but 99.9999, that sort of thing.
yeah,
But no, he will always say, you never know. And that's actually non-midlife crisis Chuck will always say, "You can never say something with that certainty." That's just
huh,
his he doesn't like people being certain of something. But he he needed to believe that because of his desire to be a father.
mhm,
Well, and so that's another toxicity piece. So, then we had a few more back and forths where he was in and out, and these were only like 2 weeks, a week, a month between that time and January 31st, let's say. So this is September out and January, a few more. And in December, when he was at home, she said that she had water on her brain, water, and it wasn't going to be fixed. She wasn't going to have it fixed unless he came back to her and she would die.
huh,
And I call that indirect suicide.
mhm,
So that's another toxicity thing.
mhm.
So there's that one.
I've heard that can be in partner poachers or AP.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so, clearly she wasn't going to go kill herself. She was doing an indirect and making it something that was really not real.
Uh-huh.
And of course, as soon as he would say a doctor appointment with her, a doctor appointment would suddenly be canceled.
Mhm.
I mean, I think there was only the one with the fake pregnancy. So there's that. Then she had her mom very sick. I mean, these are elderly people.
Mhm.
And there were a couple times I think where, and I don't know if this was in this next year during 2006 or could have been doing, it wasn't 2007 because the fair was underground. So it could have been in 2008, but probably 2006, where she would call and if he went during the times he was at home and say, I really need some comfort. She's really not doing well right now. And that's what friends would do. They would come and stay with me. Male friends would not.
Mhm.
Male friends who you are having an affair with would not. Male friends who are married and who you have had an affair with during that time. Everybody knows these things. But that's what she would. So these are forms of emotional blackmail also.
Mhm.
That right there, the indirect suicide, the faking a pregnancy, those are all types of emotional blackmail that she was using against him in his weakened state. So he's doing these things, and then he's bringing those things to me and bringing the monster and toxicity to me. So some of the things that a forward-moving spouse might be seeing, and they're seeing it as coming from their MLCer, we don't know. It might really be the alienator acting through the MLCer
Oh,
also.
absolutely. Yeah. Because,
You
a
know,
lot of MLCers give their, give,
Mhm.
uh, hand over.
Power.
Yeah,
Yes,
power.
they give power to their alienator,
Mhm.
because they live on that shortened electronic leash that we call the cell phone,
Mhm.
and that was a problem as well. So his cell phone, so he would erase the history. Finally, he'd just leave. If he wanted to contact me, he'd go to a payphone. They still had payphones back then.
Uh-huh.
He'd leave and go to a payphone that was and call me from payphone, that sort of thing. Because we saw each other regularly. There were on what boundaries I was set, there were times where we would get together regularly and go biking or go skiing if he was with her, and then it would be sneaking off. Then were times I realized, "What am I doing being the woman?
You're becoming the affair partner.
Why am I doing this? This is crazy. I need to stop." And then I would make an excuse saying, "Oh, he's changed. He really needs it now." Dumb me. "Oh, so we'll start up again." So things like that, where those are, that's on me.
Uh-huh.
But that was a lot of 2006 was just up and downs like that, back and forth like that of him coming, him going, her doing these things. She had a hysterectomy during that. He was supposed to come home, but she had the hysterectomy and he was there caring for her. I got mad and said, "You better get your ass home this day." And to be perfectly honest, I felt really bad because usually I didn't do that sort of thing. And she, I mean, it sounds so terrible. This forgetting that this is an alienator, but this is a woman who just had a major surgery.
Right, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
not that she should have my husband taking care of her.
right,
I mean, I don't wanna point it out that way, but I think I said it, like, as she was about to come home,
right.
and he was like, "Oh my god, I'm trying to leave for my wife, but I understand that. I really, really do." And I really did and the dilemma that he was in, which is terrible because you don't wanna be that understanding,
Mhm.
which and sometimes being that understanding is not always a good thing. It's a little bit like having too much empathy, is you get yourself into too much trouble. Sometimes
Mhm.
you have to sit on one side of getting impaled by that fence, and I think I have some impaled marks from sitting, and trying to be understanding of each side a little too much.
'Cause you're not wrong.
Whereas well, that means sometimes you don't stand up for yourself as you need to,
Mhm.
even when you know what you need to do.
Mhm.
Get myself stuck in that still today. But you can know what's right and know what you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you're doing it, and that's really hard. It came through in the end. I got there, and I got faster than most situations, and that's not necessarily my fault at all. And I was able to detach, and I got to detachment well, and I think one of the reasons I got to detach is, uh, I was blessed enough to have what I call a knowing, and I had the beginning, again, backwards before he even left. yoga class one day, I was just sitting there and I had this full peace for about 30 seconds and it was like waves just washed over me. And it was just this everything is going to be fine. And the going to be fine, I knew it meant that we're going to come through it together.
Mhm.
And then I had little miniature reminder knowings of that and confirmation in his behaviors and that he did keep coming home. It
Mhm.
was validated through that. I don't know how it
So
would have been if that hadn't happened, if the validation wasn't there through his behavior.
right.
No.
Good point. Overall, how many years was it from 2005 until
So 2008, October was when he left her for the last time. And at that point, remember I had said that you cannot be with that, I said the hard line of as long as you're in an inappropriate spouse, you cannot have contact with. That was only part of that boundary. That boundary also included we cannot be together for
Mhm.
so many months. And I said 12. When you leave again, there is a 12-month because he had come home 8 times
Mhm.
and we did not have a transition homes. And I tried transitions, but we didn't have another place he could stay. Some people have second houses.
Mhm.
Some people have, hey, stay with my parents. He refused. He refused to try on anyone other than that neighbor who was a friend. And even that was only going to the neighbor would have kept him forever, but Chuck wasn't going to handle that. He refused to ask, and we didn't have the extra money to get him another apartment. Although I don't use credit cards, but I was going to get as many. I would have, robbed Peter to pay Paul at multiple times and stacked up credit cards to get, 12 months onto that.
Mhm.
He would he would have been horrible with that. I would have done it.
So let me make sure I understand this.
Yeah.
You were like, he could come back, but he had to stay. You could be together, but he couldn't come home for 12 months? He had to stay
So
somewhere else for 12 months,
yeah, there had
not
to be a
see her.
transition. Yeah. And each midlife crisis will have an axis on what issues you're dealing with.
Mhm.
So, some people, it might be that you're dealing with somebody who is, whether they are truly a narcissist, but maybe the narcissistic tendencies were higher
Mhm.
and you have to deal with those. Maybe were codependent and had actual addictions. And we're going back history, not this isn't just C. Maybe had been emotional abuse that you recognized. In ours, it was this back and this house hopping or the revolving motel door.
Mhm.
And I had been trying and I hadn't succeeded yet on getting that to stop. I tried, okay, well, why don't you sleep on the couch for a month? And we both had bad backs, so that never worked. I mean, it was even more insane when I said, okay, well, just not in the same bed. I'll sleep on the couch for a month. I had a bad back too. But also, the betrayed partner gets punished by sleeping on the couch. No, that didn't work. How about you sleep in the van? It was a camper van, so it wasn't like I was saying go sleep in the car or the doghouse, literally. But no, that didn't work either. Because I mean, it was just like a separate bedroom that was the house.
Mhm.
So it really couldn't be live in my own house but have separate rooms. It couldn't be that. And so it needed to be you are going to live somewhere else. Like, and it's a dating thing and a counseling. You can go to counseling. We are a couple, just like when you're dating and you don't cohabitate.
Mhm. And let me
And
ask you here because, I
yeah,
know I know couples that back in the gosh, I guess it was like 70s maybe, around the Jim Conway era, I'm not
yeah,
sure of his era, but,
yep,
way back in the 70s and 80s,
106 or
and
so.
they, husbands who had 10-year crises came back and wives made them sleep on the couch for a year. Is there a thing to that? Like, is that how you came up with that 12-month thing?
Oh, I came up with it because I had tried a month of this, a month,
Oh, the
and
short term, yeah.
it just kept getting
It was your idea. It
longer
wasn't
and
like a
longer.
Jim Conway
No,
idea.
it was just experience after 8 tries.
Mhm.
I just kept expanding. Okay,
Yep.
months didn't work. This many months, this many apart didn't work. This many. And I knew it had to be something weighty, and I was like, "Should it be 6 or 12? 6 or 12?" And you had to say stick with it, though.
Mhm.
It could be 6
And
to 12.
did you tell him up front it
So,
was gonna be 12
so
months?
I said 12 months. The only thing so I was very concrete, sort of.
Mhm.
How can you say very and sort of? Here's how I did it. When you leave, and we knew it was when again, you cannot come home for 12 months.
Mhm.
But what I didn't say was if it was 12 months from the moment he left our house or from the moment he left her house. And that was because what if he left our house and what it was it was either July 31st or August 1st. So July 31st, whichever one was a Tuesday, I believe, he was when he left. And what if he was at her house for a week? Well, then, yeah, we can base it on when he left our house.
Mhm.
But if he was at her house for 9 months, 2 months, yeah.
Right.
So that wouldn't be very fair. Or if should he have
It's like
1
a
week?
drug. It's like 12 months out that shot of heroin or whatever.
And so he left in October. So it was August and September he was at her house. And one day in October he showed up at church. And since I'd said, and I was not good at this no contact, I would go to kind of like where he worked,
Mhm.
aisles, just so look down the aisles and he'd see me and his face would light up and I'd just walk or something like that. And I would go and leave something in his car. And by something, I mean a tiny, tiny sticker on the back of the steering wheel or a little stone because I would get these heart stones
Mhm.
and it seems sentimental, but um, neither of us are sentimental, but he said he noticed these and I found that he was carrying them
Aw.
and he would
But no
leave them.
cards saying how much you miss him, on and on and on and on.
No word, but because I made art with these stones. They were prayer dolls.
Oh, pretty.
Call them
Uh-huh.
prayer dolls. Yeah, and he and they were part of the midlife crisis art that I did.
Mhm. Oh.
So he and he knew that.
Uh-huh.
And so this particular stone that was a heart one, I found he would keep them in the car so she wouldn't see them.
Uh-huh.
So that's why he didn't have them, like carry him into her house and things. And he said he noticed when I put this sticker on a sticker. How do
Wow.
you feel a sticker on the back? He said, "Yeah, I noticed that." I would just go and get into the back. I would get into it was parked at Costco and put something on the back.
Hmm.
No words. And it wasn't like, something, not even a note, but just a thing that he could tell I'd been there in the front where it was obvious.
Huh.
Because I'll tell you, if you put a sticker on the back of my steering wheel, 3 months later, I might not know it there.
Right. I don't think I would notice.
But he says he wouldn't remember it if I said it to him
You're
today.
like a little fairy. Just
Yeah,
going in and
he said that. He
doing
said
your
he
little fairy
noticed.
dust.
He said those during this dry spell
Mhm.
of communication, I still gave him reassurances that I was still there.
Yeah.
And they're wordless, like things. So they were
Mhm.
meant to be, you know what this means.
Yep.
I'm still here. And so when he did show up, he didn't have to say anything. It was, you contact me when you are done with her, when she's gone, when you get rid of her.
Mhm.
And he didn't have to say anything. What happened was I was and I went to first service. And I had started going to first service a few years before because he always complained about how church interrupts the middle of my day. And I liked second service. But I said, very well, fine, I'll go to first service, whatever, even though he wasn't going, just as, that accommodation. So I went to first service and now I'd been to Sunday school and I was walking across to the parking lot and here comes Chuck. And it's like, there was only one reason. Chuck doesn't go to church. And especially that church, and mine where we went, he didn't usually go. He worked on Sundays and he didn't usually go anyways. He complained.
Mhm.
So he's only there for me. So I just turned around and walked back into second service with him right there. And I remember sitting there just going like this, staring at him. What's going on? Going on? And not knowing for sure. I knew going on in the sense because that there's only one reason. But we hadn't spoken because we're sitting in church.
Mhm.
And he talked to Patrick, the neighbor again, and he was going to stay in Patrick's separate room. Told Patrick it was only going to be a few weeks, not for 12 months. And what it was I did let him stay. It ended up being 12 months from our house.
Uh-huh.
But I hadn't told him that because I didn't want that answer. That was
Uh-huh.
the one.
Uh-huh.
But 12 months from when I left our house, and
But
this
wait,
was
back up to church. I'm confused.
yeah.
Did you not talk to him? Like, when you saw him in the parking lot, you just walked up beside him without
Well,
saying anything?
so Sunday school had just gotten over, and
Mhm.
right after Sunday school, second service starts.
Mhm.
So he's approaching there to go 11 o'clock service. So it was right about to start.
So
So
you
I just
both just walked did you sit next to him?
yeah, and I'm slightly hard of hearing.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, young and hard of hearing with all the 80-year-olds. So I always sit in the front row. And this is a larger church than, say, because we're in Tacoma, Washington. And so it's a little bit fuller than churches where I am now.
Uh-huh.
And we're in the front row. So it's not talking time. So I'm just, okay, here we are. And Hayden's holding my hand and we're in church. So I can't even remember what we talked about afterwards. I mean, I'm sure, hey, what's going on? Even though I know parts of what's going on, but he's staying at Patrick's house. And it was, well, it might have been a few days before I know that he's told him it will only be a few weeks. I'm like,
What's
you know what? That's a problem.
what stage do you think he was in at this point? 12-month clock started.
So it is really hard to figure out stages because I had seen liminality, but I was never sure about liminality.
Mhm.
And I had seen liminality during his year. No, wait, it wasn't during this period right before when he'd been at home in 2008. So we're still in 2008. During that spring, I believe there were these. I've talked about liminality. I have a few articles on intermittent. Intermittent is something that you might not recognize when it happens until hindsight, or not at all, or you might not be the one to see it. And so, is it happening? Or you might so many other pieces that you don't know.
Mhm.
And for Chuck, I think it was these experiences doing in our yard. He had decided he had to cut down trees. He became known as the guy who cut down trees. And then we moved over to East Wenatchee. He started planting tons of trees, which is the strangest thing. But he wanted to cut down trees, but he wanted to do it by hand. That was the big deal, was by hand. And then when he had one of them, he had to have professionally done. It turned out it didn't have a disease. And he looks at me and goes, oops, sorry. He just always wanted that tree gone. But the next thing was he wanted to get rid of the stumps. And again, it had to be by hand. And I think that was the big important part of it. So this was all about getting himself involved manually into the nature of it. And
Hmm.
one day he was out working on a cherry tree stump in the front yard. And at least one or two of these in power line issues. So that there was some validity to some of them. But it was raining. And he said, hey, can you come help me? And for an hour or two, I went out there and I helped him, and it was amazing. He had it was like this trench in the front yard, digging, and I could feel the addiction of it right then. If I'd gone back inside, I'm not going back out there. But while I was out there, I was not leaving. I was like, no, we almost got this. Just under here, just under here. And we had little hand saws, and I could really feel what healing in those moments. And it was a few hours, like 1-2 hours that we were out there in the mud. And I could feel that you were getting into the earth, becoming one with it. And I think that's what liminality, parts of it would feel like.
Hmm.
And for him, it's going to look different for different people.
Mhm.
His liminality, I think, needed to be that kind of active thing
Yeah.
rather than a mental thing. Liminality for me would probably be a lot of thinking. But for him, he probably has to be physical,
Mhm.
get it going. And if you were to ask him about it later, he might not be able to verbalize thoughts that went with it. But me, I work with, so it would be different.
Mhm. So that was a real turning point. The
Yeah, I
there.
think some of those things. And that year, those times he was writing to me
Uh-huh.
while I was at work, which was this other job, in emails telling me how he didn't understand. I don't get why do people care about because his family was really upset at him for the back and forth. Just
Uh,
wanted him to be people care about what I'm doing. I guess I'm different than everybody else.
huh.
That, why do they care where I am at? And I was responding, going, it's like I'm banging my head against a brick wall. You are driving a car with the alienator still in it. So I don't want to buy that car. Why are you trying to sell me this car? You tell me you want to come home, and you're not going to come home while you're still with her. And then I'd cave and he'd come home. But that's the thing is, if you wanted to prove to me that he wanted to come home, why can't I just come home? Prove to me you want to come home by not being with her.
Mhm.
And that was it. And I knew that it was not ever going to work. Continue to repeat this cycle where 8 times he'd come and gone, come and gone. We would have continued to repeat that until we got that piece where there's a space between it of you cannot just come from her to me. There has to be a space. You have to show that I am more important than he is by saying you are willing to have a space without where you're reassured that I'm going to be here.
Mhm.
And he's still not willing to do that because I don't have anywhere to go. Poor baby. And I wasn't going to feel sorry for him, but because I didn't know what to do and I
Mhm.
didn't have, I didn't have somewhere to go. And I wasn't trying to make somewhere up. And then one time I even asked my mentor, the same one that was very strict. And she's like, what do you want to do? Or maybe should you? And I don't know if she was just asking me a question. Because the next time I was like, don't ask me that. If you know the answers, I shouldn't. Don't ask me.
Mhm.
Because she asked me something and I was like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to let him home. Because I think that's what she said I should do. And I did for Easter.
Mhm.
My goal is to be home by Easter, he told me in 2008. And so he was. Even though every time I did that, I really
Was
knew it was a mistake.
was 12 months up?
No, that was before the start.
Oh, okay.
Easter of 2008 was another, I kicked him out at the end of January or early February.
Uh-huh.
So I let him back in at Easter. Then he was gone. The last time he left the house was July 31st. July 31st, August 1st. And then left her again in October. So here's what happened after that. Because he didn't tell Pat, the neighbor,
Mhm.
that it was supposed to be for a whole year. And I was like, how is this going to work? Oh my God. And Pat didn't live right next door. He had been our next door neighbor, which would have been really bad. Because he was
Yeah,
literally,
too close. Mhm.
that would have been a bedroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he had a couple years before bought a little flex stucco house about 3 blocks away. And it had 2 apartments plus the apartment Patrick lived in, so 3. And so Chuck had the second bedroom in Patrick's apartment for free. And so it was a few blocks away, but walking. But not like you should walk there at night,
No,
anymore.
yeah. It's still distant
So
enough.
not in Tacoma.
Well,
So
he was lucky with that.
he was. But what happened? And he had Patrick. He said it'll be a couple weeks,
Mhm.
and then I'll be back. I'll be home. And I was like, what? So then Thanksgiving came, and I went home to Grandma. Just recently moved in with my mom. She was 90, and I left on Wednesday night. And Thanksgiving morning, Grandma's out, I think, getting some toast in the kitchen, and she collapsed in my arms.
Oh.
And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, it's Thanksgiving Day, and my grandma's going to die in my arms. And uh, EMS arrives, me holding Grandma and all of that. And several weeks later, we discovered that she had a urinary tract infection. But for those weeks, it was really difficult. Once that resolved, she was much better.
Mhm.
But just that, I was like, my mom can't do this. She needs help. My mom lived 100 miles from me. And I had lost the Friday before. So I didn't have to worry about, because if I hadn't lost my job, there would have been no way. So it was so perfect. Lost job due to the not good at compartmentalizing the trauma at home.
Oh.
But, and it wasn't a career track job.
Still,
And,
it sounds like it was right before Thanksgiving.
yeah, of those, it's coming.
Oh.
Yeah. So I had jobs during his crisis. One that I had when I started, and then I was out of work for a year after that, and then I got another job. I did it for exactly 2 years, and then that one, and that was a great job for the first year and a half. But then when he came home in 2008, he would come to my office. Nope. He would come to my office all the time. He
Mhm.
would call my office. if he called and I answered, and it wasn't a call, I was working as the receptionist, so I had to answer the phone,
Mm.
and you couldn't see who was calling.
Uh-huh. No
So I
caller ID.
answered the
Yeah.
phone, yeah, and it's him,
Oh.
and it was one of those, so they can all tell what's going on.
Oh,
It's awful.
awkward.
Yeah, awkward. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that didn't last, and it was a big relief. It was a
Mhm.
big relief. But now I am free to tell my mom, "Okay, you know what? She didn't ask me. I'm do this alone, and I needed it so bad. I'm going to go home, and I'm gonna down and come back." I don't know if I went home on Saturday and came back on Sunday. I think I came or went home Sunday and came back on Monday. But, I mean, I literally went home. I said, and that because it wasn't that Chuck couldn't come to our house, it was that we couldn't in the same house.
Mhm.
And that solved all of our problems because now we didn't have to pay for a separate residence. We didn't have to burden anybody. And it also gave Chuck this excuse for people that helped him save face, which you don't always
Oh,
wanna
yeah.
do.
Back home, and you're helping your mom and grandmother.
Exactly, and he could tell people, "Yeah, my wife has gone to help her grandma," and
Mhm.
that's a valid reason for many wives to do,
Totally.
and I had this wonderful experience from then through July. I came home August 1st, like we had planned,
Mhm.
and I wrote a manuscript during that period, and I had just started building my website in August, and my mom took care of me in the sense of I had the food fairy,
Mhm.
who is a really good cook. Just food literally would just come appear on this hand tray and be set down next to the computer where I was working. Like, oh my god. Laundry was done for me, not kidding. It was amazing, and what I did, though, was I went home beginning every other week, and then as the year progressed, I extended it by a day, and then a day, and then a day, and we got Chuck into counseling, and then I eventually joined him because I was there not only during the weekends. And so we were going to counseling together during those times I was home through the year. And by the end, I think by the end, I might have been home for a week and not home for a week by the end of that, by August. In
Mhm.
fact, by that time, I was like waiting, counting the days. Even though I loved being with grandma, I was counting the days till I'm completely home.
Aw. And
Just so that I could.
was this 2009?
So it was 2009.
Okay,
By the
okay.
time. Yeah. Yeah, and by then I had pretty much filled out most of the website. It was a early phase of the website, the design and all of that, but I'd written many articles because the articles on the website were the book. As I'm writing the book, I am putting out the chapters as articles for the website on that.
And you know what, Kenda? I'm gonna
Yeah.
stop you right there because I'm gonna start part 2. We're gonna be a part 2, and we're gonna so we're gonna stop it right here, and part 2 is gonna start with the end of 2009 and what happens in 2010. So you
Sounds good.
stay right there.
Okay.
Wow, thanks for listening to Kenda today. So that's a lot of back and forth. I can't believe the patience she had. That is amazing. Just revolving door. And she hung in there and now it's been, let's see, that started in 2005 and then Chuck was home in 2009 and now it's 2024. So what is that, you guys? 2025 actually. 2025. Wow, so Chuck has been home for 16 years. So they have, they have restored their marriage and their family is thriving with 5 little foster children that they took in as infants. And so they've got a super busy household. And Kenda continues to expand her midlife crisis knowledge and offerings. So I'll just tell you now, you can check out her website, midlife crisis marriageadvocate.com. And on there, you'll find information about Thrive membership, the one-on-one coaching. She's got a quiz on there asking, if you to help you figure out if your spouse is in midlife crisis. She's got a free little midlife crisis course. It's just a 3-parter that you can do over, a couple hours. It's just self-paced. And anyway, just lots of information for anybody who's new to this. I highly recommend that you go check out midlifecrisismarriageadvocate.com. Okay, so we didn't finish today with Kenda, and there's a lot more. So we have a part 2 coming out, and we're going to hear about how she started, her forum, the website, and we're going to bring it all the way up here to today to 2025. So stay tuned for part 2. Check it out. Thanks for joining us today.